So I'm going to start the day today with Dr. Jin Canrong. He's the president of the Chinese Society for Future Studies. He's also a university professor and an associate dean at the School of International Studies at Renmin University in China. What else do I know? I know he's written over 100 academic articles. I know that he's written thousands of, papers and thousands of articles. I also know he's written 10 books, of which five translated books, actually, of which he translated. He spent a lot of time in the US, and he's going to tell you what's going on in future studies in China, which I think is going to be very interesting. So I'm leaving the stage to Dr. Jin Canrong. Welcome, Dr. Jin.
Thank you, Professor Woodgate. It's a great honor, great pleasure for me to share some view with my European friends, my European colleagues. The Chinese Society for Future Studies established 42 years ago in the January 16th, 1979, established at Beijing. Now we own over 30 subcommittee and over 10,000 individual members. Perhaps compared to our European society is quite large, but in China is quite small. And as for the future studies, actually 40 years ago when we established, it's very hot. At that time, many Chinese people, the public, rely on us to look in the future, ask us to make bold forecasting for the coming days. But nowadays, I think the future studies are not as hot as 40 years ago, because now people very sure what will be happening in the near future. So compared to 40 years ago, the demand from society not that much. So that's a reality. But we will still focus on our job, try to give better answer to the demand of our public. And so because of that, we like very much to have more cooperation with our European colleagues. But today, I want to introduce how Chinese scholar look into the outside world. But I will make a comparison. Today, when you visit China and you talk with scholars, many scholars will share this viewpoint. That is, the only thing certain is uncertain, because the world outside China is very disturbing, and the future direction not very clear, right? And this uncertainty, meaning compared to 40 years ago. Back to 40 years ago, at the early 1980s, that is the early stage of Chinese reform and opening up. At that time, from Chinese perspective, the outside world is comparatively certain. Why is that? At that time, we believe the Western society get into the so-called post-industrial society. You know, the professor of Harvard University, Daniel Bell, published his book, The Coming of a Post-Industrial Society, translated into China, and got a huge market success. And then his book told us China has two jobs to do. One is industrialize China itself, because Western countries finish this job, industrialization, right? But China still at the process of industrializing itself in early 1980s. But then we have the second job to catch up the Western countries further, make China become a post-industrial society, right? So that's something very sure. China need to do two things: industrialize itself, then get further to become a post-industrial society. Next, please. In early 1980s, two books has big influence in China. One is a book by Alvin Toffler, The Third Wave, and another one is by John Naisbitt, The Grand Trend. And these two books told us the so-called post-industrial society is based on information technology revolution. And the main feature of this, the coming society is economy, is so-called digital economy. So people believe after the agricultural-based society, followed by industry society, then followed by information society. That's something very sure, widely shared the view at that time. The third thing, very certain, is that in early 1980s, people in China reached the consensus that is the performance of a market economy is better than the planned economy, because China practiced planned economy for over 30 years, and the result is not very satisfying. And then we noticed in outside China, there is a trend of globalization, and this globalization is very market-oriented, led by the West, but especially led by Anglo-Saxon people, UK and United States. Actually, people believe in the past 4 decades, the globalization initiated by Margaret Thatcher's revolution and Ronald Reagan's revolution in the United States. People in China in early 1980s, believe this is something inevitable. Like it or dislike it, you have to join it. Then China jumped into the market economy, the sea of market economy, jump into the global market. And the fourth thing, very certain, is that the so-called geopolitical structure in early 1980s is very clear. That's still a typical so-called bipolar world. There are two superpowers, USA and the Soviet Union, or USSR, right? And so that make China's choice rather easy. China should do something to make a balanced position between US and the Soviet Union, right? Next, please. But compared to 40 years ago, today, China facing a very uncertain world. Where the uncertainty located? First, we believe, many Chinese people believe now the Western countries, most of the Western countries entered information society. And some non-Western countries like China or ROK, South Korea, also partly entered that information society. But now we have a problem. The so-called IT, information technology revolution, slowing down. That's the reason why the economy slowing down in recent years. So that's one thing. We entered the third wave society, but the technology base slowing down. The second thing is that what will be the next technology breakthrough? We don't know. We have no clear idea at the moment. Many scientists, many businessmen, they believe the possible breakthrough mainly located at the following 5 directions. One is industry material, graphene. Another is so-called gene engineering. The third is artificial intelligence. The fourth is so-called nuclear fusion, right? And the fifth is quantum computation. And all these possible technology breakthrough need huge investment. Many countries cannot afford to do that. Because we have no assured no assurance for the success. So it's quite an adventure for any country to make the decision. And the third uncertainty facing today's world is that the globalization now facing challenge. As I mentioned, the globalization, market-oriented, led by the West, but mainly by the Anglo-Saxon people, right, by UK and the US. But in US and in UK, they are coming, the anti-globalization movement. In the United States, they have a Donald Trump phenomena. And the UK, now they just left UK. We see Brexit occurred, right? Next, please. The fourth uncertainty relating with global governance. From our perspective, now the world facing the so-called the deficit of global governance. What this means? Today's world facing more problems than before. We have terrorism, we have climate change, globalization slowing down, and there are more social unrest in many developing countries. Even in developed countries, in January 6th, the right-wing people occupied Capitol Hill at the United States. And the value conflict also occurred everywhere, right? So the situation in the world is that the demand for global governance keeps increasing. But in the same time, the supply of global governance decreased. The United States, especially states under the leadership of Donald Trump, they become very self-centered. To some extent, they have become very selfish. Every day they repeat American first, buy America, hire American. They don't want to share their responsibility. Although EU countries still want to do something, but the EU facing its own problem, right? So that's the reality. That there are more global issues, there are more global challenges. Something very new, climate change, and the new challenges coming with so-called digital economy. And there is a digital gap, right, among different countries, among different peoples. Those big companies owns digital power. They can control people's life and even people's thinking. Right? So we have many new challenges, and these challenges lead to the demand increase for global governance. But on the other side, the supply for global governance decreased to some extent. Up to date, we have to say the global governance, meaning the public goods relating with global governance, mainly contributed by US and the UK. But these two public goods contributed, they have their problem, right? So the result is that since the demand increasing while the supply decreasing, then there is a deficit of global governance. And that leads to some uncertainty, right? And the fifth uncertainty relating with big power relations. In the first 10 years of the post-Cold War era, big power relations looks good. But now we see the deterioration of big power relations, especially US-China relations, US-Russian relations. And in recent days, in EU-China, EU-Russia relations also facing some problem, right? Without controllable cooperative big power relations, many necessary cooperation cannot going on, right? So that is the world that we are facing. From Chinese perspective, that's quite unfortunate, but it's the reality. So facing this uncertain world, how China deal with that? My observation told me there are several key points to understand China's strategy or China's approach to deal with this uncertain outside world. One is that China decided to investment huge in research and development. Last year, China's R&D investment ranking number 2 in the world, only second to United States, surpassed the EU as a whole. I think according to the annual growth rate, China's annual growth of R&D around 12 to 14% every year, while United States, the annual increase of the United States just around 1%. So very possible in the coming 5 years, China's R&D investment will surpass the United States. That's one thing. Second is that China invests huge on so-called high-tech industry, including semiconductor industry, chips. So invest more in R&D, invest more on high-tech industry. That's the first choice of China. Second, China, last year, by the end of last year, the Chinese government decided to take a new development strategy called dual circulation development pattern. That's something new. In the past 4 decades, China's development strategy is mainly participated globalization, focus on global market. But now China trust on the global market decreased. So China will increase the domestic market. China will rely more on domestic market. And China has some chance to do that because this year, China's retail market will surpass the United States, become #1 in the world, right? China will not give up the outside market, but will more rely on the domestic market, unlike something before. Before, China mainly focused on external market, but now we'll try to seize the chance in two markets, domestic market and outside market, but more rely on the domestic market. So that's something we call a dual circulation development pattern. That's one thing. That's something to deal with the possible so-called anti-globalization trend. And another way to deal with this sort of anti-globalization risk is China will push forward so-called Belt and Road Initiative. China will invest more to those developing countries, help them to have better infrastructure and get economically get closer to China. That's the second way. The third is that China will be more active in participating in global governance. Perhaps some of you noticed the Chinese leader Xi Jinping raised the idea to push the world towards a so-called community with a shared future. What it means actually depends on the practice in the future, but the goal is to to stress more on the common interests of different countries and try to establish a new type of community. But one thing is very sure, China will be more active in contribute public goods for global governance. And finally, China's approach to deal with uncertain outside world is try to make the U.S.-China relations under control. We know there are a lot of tension between U.S.-China, but China will do its best to make the tension under control. While China will pay special attention to China-Russian relations, try to strengthen the relationship with Russia. And for other parts of the world, China try to make partnership as more as possible. And finally, China want to have a so-called global partnership network. Okay, that's my observation. So make a summary. Compared to 40 years ago, from Chinese perspective, today's world is rather uncertain. And to deal this uncertain outside world, the first priority is to make China strong in science and technology, in industry, and to make China's domestic market more reliable, and to play more active role in global governance, and try to make the state-to-state relationship, try to make China's relationship with the big powers, neighborhood, and other parts of the world as stable as possible. Okay, that's a very short introduction about how a Chinese scholar perceive the outside world and how China will deal with outside world. Finally, I should say that China is a very diversified society. So on every issue, we have a different opinion. What I expressed here is just mainly my personal observation. So I should stop here. Very glad to re-establish academic tie with our European colleagues. Hope our two sides, Chinese Society for Future Studies and our European Society, have a better cooperation in the coming days. And thanks again for Professor Woodgate to give me this chance. Thank you. Thank you all.
Thank you, Dr. Jin. Thank you very much. Would you like to take some questions?
Perhaps only 5 minutes.
Okay. Any questions for Dr. Jin? Okay. Oh, sorry.
Yeah, hello. You talked a lot about China's future, but what is the rest of us? It sounded to me a little bit like a nationalistic approach. So I had the feeling we're still there, we're the rest of the world. So what is our future? How do you interconnect to that?
You know, China itself is a word. We have 1 point of, not include Taiwan, Hong Kong, Macau. Only in mainland China, we have 1.42 billion population, right? So China itself is a big word. So for Chinese government, for Chinese elites, I think our focus mainly within China. That's a tradition. But definitely China want to do more in global governance, right? So that's why our leader Xi Jinping put forward this idea, a community with shared future. So I think as a Chinese scholar, we will focus on the challenging by China and then try to deal with that. But in the same time, China will get ready to contribute something to outside the world. But I think in the coming days, we believe US, EU, you still take the lead in modernization, right? So you have more resources to resolve your problem. So China's relation with these developed countries is mainly try to make the relationship stable and try to keep the economic cooperation forward to have a mutual benefit relationship. And as for China's role in global governance, I think China will mainly focus on those global issues like climate change, anti-terror, or stop the spread of nuclear proliferation. And as for geo-economic cooperation, I think China will invest more on so-called road and built countries. That's mainly developing countries. So my opinion is that in the coming days, China's main resources will invest in domestic issues, but China will gradually increase its contribution to outside world. But EU, US, I think you still on the on the lead. You still belong to the leading group of development. So you have more resources to resolve your own problem.
Dr. Jin, thank you very much. It's absolutely interesting listening to you. From the perspective of the World Future Studies Federation, and also along the question that just was raised, how do you see your role within our community? Because we as a global community, and I think it's extremely interesting what you're doing and what you're trying to do in China. But how do you see the role of your activity towards the federation in the near future? Thank you.
I think to some extent, scholars in China is fortunate. Our government mainly run by technocrats. They are mainly trained as an engineer, right? So they have very deep belief in intellectual community. but in US, you see, very strong anti-intellectual trend led by Donald Trump. So I think, comparatively speaking, Chinese intellectual community, including our Future Studies Society, we can play some role to help how to say, resolve our domestic challenge and help China have some, constructive cooperation with outside world.
I'm going to have to cut it because we need to go to the sessions. Dr. Jin, thank you so much. And
Thank you, Derek.
I'll see you soon, I hope. Bye.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you.